2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 1, 1. Yeah, so. This is, okay, second. No, 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 no. No, 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 no. No, 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 no. No. How? Sorry? 1, 2, 1, 2.
The connection to the slides, how do we do it?
What right?
The presenters.
Yeah, there's HDMI over there.
Table and cable.
Wow.
Hello, hello, hello. Where is Noemi? Not in the next 5 minutes, but the next 10, yes. we have a YouTube stream going on, and it's on the YouTube channel. I should have put a link in the Telegram, but if somebody can do it, thanks. Can you do it?
Yeah, I'm opening.
You go on YouTube.
YouTube.
Okay, okay. Can start anyway. Ah, fuck, this fake channel. Go down. Okay, this
Live stream.
no, 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 this one, this one. The crypto association. This one. If you want to put the link on. Okay, when Noemi arrives, tell her to send the presentation that she has to do on my Telegram.
To your Telegram.
Yeah, and
sure.
we open it here. Yeah. Can start.
Live stream link.
Huh? Sending it on Telegram. Okay, so we have a live stream link on Telegram now, right? Yeah, so if you want to share, yeah, we should also tweet it, no? Can you tweet it?
I will tweet it, and please, that was good. Please let the people out there know that they can follow us online.
The millions and millions that want to follow this event online.
Exactly.
The not privileged that could come here. Yeah. Is there? Hello, everybody. How are you? Woo! Oh my God. We are at the third edition, and it's a big honor to be here. Thank you for coming. Who was here in the first CCG? Okay. Second CCG? Third CCG? Woo! Okay. So, we are everyone here. We are so back. Sorry, I had to do this slide. Okay. We will just a short presentation. Will be CCA, Common Sub, some inclusivity rules to all feel safe and comfortable here. And then we can start with Neighbors, the first sponsor of the day. And thank you, Neighbors. Thank you also Circus UBI, Ethic Hub, Power Protocol, Silo, Holochain, and Q Protocol. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, all the sponsors, and thank you for being here. So this will be the event. Morning are structured, afternoon are deliberative structured, and there is a topic for every day. I'm sorry, this is wrong, but coordinations is today, and refi is the last day. So yeah. And this is our, the story. Me and Felix met. We did a CCG23, real value, and then a lot of events. And here we are now. Who didn't know CCA before coming to this event? Okay. You. Okay. Nice. Some events. We will do events as well next year. This is the third CCG. We did 2 SolarPunk events, then CoFi and ReFi. Yeah, most likely next year will be SolarPunk in April, maybe a ReFi event, no, a CoFi event in May, and then the CCG, always at this time. So yeah, you better stay around. And we have also other big plans. Now we will speak about the separation between the Common Sub and CCA. Speaking of CCA, we have some projects going on. The main one, and my child that I want to develop next year, now that the event part is more streamlined, is the Commons Economy Roadmap, which I will give a presentation in 2 days, in the morning, and then we would like to activate an events protocol instead of just doing a lot of events here or doing very big events here. It's better to distribute the memes and the competencies we have and the projects across the network of spaces that we are developing around Europe, like TDF, Akasha Hub in Barcelona, and many others. And then we are developing our chatbot, like a ChatGPT-like chatbot for CoFi, and then ideally for post-capitalism in general. We will speak about that tomorrow. And now I can leave the word to Commons Hub directors, Felix and Emil, or both. And yeah, just as one reminder, we have a Gitcoin grant going on. It's called ReFi VN, because we are trying to activate the ReFi VN node of ReFi DAO. So we put the link in the Telegram. If you can donate on Optimism, that's good. Yeah, thank you again.
Okay, first off, the tweet is out. Please share it widely. It's on the CCA account, CCA Twitter account. I also posted it in our general Telegram group chat, not the event chat, to which I think I have not been added because I keep on not finding this stuff. Yeah, but these things aside, the Commons Hub is on a path of professionalization. We launched a company and we have a website from today on. A new, We have our own logo, we have our own t-shirts in 3 different variations, which can be purchased from us, the team. Euro, cash, cash, cash only. And yeah, the website is somewhat half done apparently. Well, how do you depict a validator node? Come on. How does that even look like, Emil? Any ideas? Yeah. I think we also have one of Emil. Yeah. So, yeah, briefly said, the Commons Hub will be or is already a co-living and co-working environment, but also an event venue, as you know it. In the next years, we want to also go towards more Fab Lab, incubator kind of stuff, so to also have projects be developed here. We are thinking about rock climbing, so Commons Hub rock climbing, that will be Emil. We launched our validator nodes for Cosmos Hub and Region Network and Stride and Neutron 2 days ago. We are on mainnet and you can stake on us. And we will talk more about the validator nodes in the near future, in 3 days. Is that a question? What's the website? Thank you very much. commons-hub.com. Com. You can also try with @ it leads you to com. Good question. Not yet, but it will be fixed until winter. That's actually leading to expansion plans, which there are many. First is a new heating. We want to shift from diesel to pellets. Then we want to build out the 3rd floor, add 20 more beds, and have solar panels produce most of the energy we consume here our own. And many more expansion plans. The field? Yes. Yeah, of course, more gardening, more efficient gardening, more automated gardening. The farm bot should work at some point and produce the salads one day. And yeah, further reaching plans involve a potential eco-village right behind the house. Over there you will see a field of corn currently that we would like to add to here, and then from there expand to an eco-village. But we'll talk more about that during the week. Yeah, yeah. And I think that was it on the Commons Hub. Of course, if you are interested in organizing an event here, please come and talk to us.
And also, we are already living here, me and Felix and Thomas, of course. We'll be here up to October, then it becomes cold. We go away in heat places, and then we come back in March. So if you are looking for a place to stay for some weeks or some months, let us know, and yeah, we can arrange that. Now we will speak about rules for inclusivity and non-discrimination. I only do a shout out to Domenico, our colleague, which was meant to come, but he got sick 2 days before the event. So he's over. Sorry. Thank you, Domenico, for all the banners and all the work.
You hear me without the microphone? I really hate it. It's okay?
Yeah, for the streaming you should.
For the streaming I should. Okay, that's okay. Okay, then I will keep it. Just tell me if I'm using it right because I hate them. All right, so, well, welcome again to everybody, especially those who arrived today and don't know anything of what is going to happen yet. I'm Noemi. We did some activities together yesterday. You discovered that we will be doing funny things together in general terms, but I need you to be real serious on this because it's super important, and every year there's this feeling that it's not so important, but I know it is, and I hope you will feel good about it. If any question happen, just let me know. So, oh no, why is this? Ma la tabella si legge? Yeah, the context is, the content is more important than the graphic. This fucked up, but it's okay. So what we're talking about, what we want for this week for everybody is that every single one of you feels safe, respected and seen from everybody else. We are a lot of people will be sharing spaces and time all the week. And so it is important that we all have in mind that you're living with other people and we have to respect each and every single one of them. And this starts from, guys, it's okay, just go on, please.
I can move the slide.
Yeah, just go. Se premo la freccia, fa. No. Posso attaccare il mio coso?
Sì.
Yeah, no, it's just that I sent it to Giulio. It's always the problem.
Wah, wah.
Okay, way better.
We are so back.
We are so back. Okay, so what does this mean? First thing, zero tolerance for any kind of discrimination. No discrimination based on gender, religion, sexual orientation, ethnicity, or any personal future is completely banned and will be not make us happy, and you will see that. Avoid any discrimination term, language, jokes, or actions. If you witness any of this, please be aware that there is an awareness team in this group, which is me. Please stand up, Pablo. Daniel, and Catherine, which is not here yet, maybe, but you will see. Raise your hand again. All right, it's us. We are people where you can be safe around, being anything that you are and want to be and don't want to express. So whatever you feel that this is happening, just come to us. So, we are coming from every angle of the world in this room. It's amazing how richness and diversity there is, and I'm so happy to see it, and I hope you will see the beauty of it. Of course, differences can tear us apart, but I hope we can use them to get closer and be aware, of course, that there is people around you that have different culture from you, and that may be not feeling the same thing that you do. So, ask questions if you don't know. And if you don't know, just try to not, just shut up a bit sometimes. Okay. Go. All right, talking about language. Language is important. We are all using English, which help us a lot with this. It's quite inclusive language, but this doesn't mean that there cannot be problems. Don't assume anything. Let's start from this. All the time in your life, don't assume anything. Don't assume gender people, don't do stereotypes, don't discriminate, and make sure that everybody around you can feel safe around you. Terms, not use guys, just use everyone, folks, or any neutral term. You are all used to do that, so it's not gonna be hard. Commoners, let's go. Bros, bras, let's go. All right, as I said, pronouns, all right? Respect and use preferred person of somebody, if you know. If you don't know, just ask. Wait for an answer and then respect that. If you don't know and don't want to ask, don't feel comfortable in asking, just use they or them. Easy. Go. Active listening and respectful behavior, okay? So I hope I don't get anybody offended, but there's a high percentage of two categories that just usually don't know when to shut the fuck up. One is men, and one is neurodivergent people, and in this room there's a high number of both of them. So what I would like to see is people learning to actually listen and understand what they are listening to, not trying to find solution, not trying to give answers and show who's talking, how smart they are. Just listen. Understand what somebody's telling you. Respect and don't ever interrupt anybody. And learn when it is the time to shut the fuck up. Cool. Language. Again, I know it's the third time that I say this, but it's important. Be sensitive, all right? This is a very little thing, but it makes the difference, okay? A person is not his future. A disabled person is not just disabled. A blind person is not just a blind person. So, person with a disability is what we're talking about, and not disabled person. I know I just said it, but it's wrong, all right? Consent and boundaries. Okay, this is funny. Well, of course, be mindful of personal spaces of other people. Don't touch people if you're not invited to do so. Don't harass people. You will never be invited to do so, but just respect that. Always ask for consent before touching somebody. And wait, it is super funny because I want to share this feedback that I got with you. So last year I did something like this, a bit more stated on consent, because I think it's one of the most concepts we need to keep in mind. And some months later, like in April, one of you, I honestly don't remember who it was, arrived at the hub. Again, it was April, I was here. It was like, oh, hi, you're Noemi. You are the one who didn't want us to have sex. And I was I? I mean, not really. No, not really. I think we're all grown adults here and totally capable of doing what we want with our bodies, as long as we respect the others, okay? So it's not hard, and I hope, I'm actually quite sure, it was a joke, because if a grown man perceives basic consent rules as don't have sex, he may be the problem. So, okay. Let's go. I think maybe we're done. We're done. Thank you. Just respect each other, be nice, try not to be assholes, and we'll have an amazing week.
And now it's time for Pablo. Got some applause.
I send it to you in. Yeah. No, better on yours so I can read my notes.
Yeah.
Hello. Maybe I can start speaking while you plug that in. Maybe I sit, if you all don't mind.
Thank you. Yeah, it's so nice to be here. I'm Pablo. Been here quite a few times, and I'm really happy to be surrounded by so many good friends and also new people. So that's, yeah, really exciting. I work as a media artist and designer in various projects in this field of social coordination and post-capitalist economies. But particularly now, I come in representation of the neighborhoods team. Yeah, I mean, it's okay, we can continue. We are a project building on top of Holochain, building a social coordination framework for the distributed web. We're a team of around 12 people in working in different capacities, a few full-time, most of us part-time. Yeah, so I come in representation of a larger team. Yeah, so what is neighborhoods? Generally speaking, neighborhoods is these three things. It's modular, customizable groupware, so software for groups. It is a social intelligence layer, more on that later, where we're doing sense making within and across communities. And it is also a bazaar connecting developers and communities. So a bazaar is what we refer to as a marketplace with a social fabric. And these are the three main focuses that we are developing in neighborhoods. Still very early on. I was here last year. I showed very, very early stuff. I'm really happy to share that today. Yeah, we have a solid team. We're working. Holochain's been in beta for a few months now, so things are moving much faster. It's a really exciting time, to be honest. But I have to say, most of these things are still very early on. I'm showing code or some things that are working in code, but most of it is very alpha, I should say. Yeah, what's our objective is to open source the black box of social media. So to, in a way, find the modularity that social groupware is composed of. What is it made of? Posts, likes, assessments, resources, feeds, algorithms, all of that. We want to generalize it, modularize it, and make it, yeah, so that communities can choose what they want to have in their social applications. I'm gonna follow it here too. Yeah, so how does this actually look like? Surprise, surprise, for now it looks like a Discord clone. Uh, yeah, I mean, that's for various reasons. One, it's an accessible format. A lot of people know how it looks, how it feels, how it works. And also because we're building on top of which is a holochain application that looks in a similar way. We'll be building on top of that. So that's the reason we're going with this paradigm for now. This is not the only way people could use neighborhoods, but it is the easiest for now. Yeah, next slide. So what do we mean by groupware? We mean a bunch of applets, modular software that communities can install on their groups. This could be things like a chat applet, maybe even a feed applet, a game, a shared calendar, and whatever our community of developers see as useful applets. The idea is that communities can have multiple applets, coordinate in different ways on their own terms. Yeah, this is some mockups that we've been working on. Some of these are implemented, some of these are not implemented. This is an example of a music applet. Here you will have songs as resources, and people would be using assessments, in this case these three emojis, to categorize them in playlists in a collective way. Next one. This is a to-do applet. Here you have tasks as resources, and then you have these eyes to fire emojis to categorize how crucial a task is, and then collectively we can see what is the most pressing issue we should tackle. So yeah, we're part of my push is that this is like customizable themability is really like a first-class thought. We want this to be as personalizationable allies as possible. You get what I mean? Uh, yeah, so please just show a few of these, just a few themes. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Hopefully we'll get there. We're two. We're two in the design, in the front end design team. Yeah. The reasoning behind what? Yeah. So we're designing with sort of having how to say, programmatically approach in mind. So we don't want to prescribe how things should look. We want to offer the tools so that things look however you want them to look. That's the objective. We, in neighborhoods, we say very often we want to create generic tools so that specific cultures can emerge. So how can we create the most basic functionality that is modularized and small so that people can attach their own culture to it? That has different levels of expression, right? Visual aesthetic is just one way of expressing your culture. So yeah, that's the reasoning behind modularize everything. Everything is a variable. You can change whatever you want. That's the idea behind. Yeah, so until now, we've seen this paradigm. We have these contexts and we have these resources. I'm sharing you a bit of how we are thinking of these modules. So in the music context, you had songs as the resource. In the feed context, you had posts. In the to-do, you have tasks. But we can also think of things as a poll. Could be a context where options are the resource. You can start to see how things that we generally associate with decision making can be also understood within the framework of sense making. Yeah, and how do we do this sense making? We use assessments. We're focusing on assessments right now. Assessments are things we encounter all the time in social media, things like likes, claps, upvotes and downvotes, emoji reactions, ratings, all these kinds of small gestures that we use emojis with very often. Those are assessments. We're focusing on them for now as a sense-making operation. So communities can choose what assessments they want to see on their resources. Next slide, please. We've come up with categorizing quite a few of them and the usual UI, UX patterns they follow. These are just a few that you probably have encountered often. They have different ways of interacting with it. You know, like a like, it's a singular one, you either like it or not. Multiple, so you can click it multiple times. Dual, you can choose one or two. A range, you can choose in a sliding scale. Or a group, you can choose one of many. And a rating, you can give like 1 to 5 in this case with stars. These are just like the very common versions of them. Can we do next slide? But of course, communities will be able to choose whatever icon they want. If they want an emoji or an image or whatever they want to become an assessment in their system so that they can yeah, create their own way of relating to the resources they are sharing in a way that you can collectively define how things are made visible. What do we value the most? What do we want to see the most of? And how do we create that culture within our social groups? Next one. So yeah, this is just previews of how this could look. And they can be as esoteric as you want. And the idea is to, yeah, go to the next one. That communities can create custom algorithms to affect to sort of like take the data from the collective assessments and define how this is applied to the visibility of resources. We want this to be as accessible as possible, to really be as low code or even no code if possible, with tools like this, right? Like you can you go to the next slide? No, yeah. So the most likes in the last 5 days, we can arrange a feed that way, right? So the things that have the most likes in the last 5 days go to the top. The community sees them first. We all share this algorithm. This algorithm is open for everyone to see how it works. Yeah, and for us to collectively decide on the scoring of our resources. Yeah, I wanted to go through a few of these so that it's like more or less clear how they work. So for example, if we have like as an assessment, we define likability as a dimension. So you are positioning resources on the dimension of likability through likes. A very easy method would be where we just want to see the most likes at the top. So in this case, the number of likes corresponds to the score of each post. So if something has 20 likes, the score of that post is 20, right? This is a super simple algorithm, but very soon, very easily, you can get much more complex things. If you go to the next one. So for example, here we have two assessments, singular assessments, a heart and a flag. Yeah, a red flag. And we have two operations for this method. We have the dimension. In this case, it's a dimension of freshness. So we are assessing things so that the freshest things go to the top. In this case, dividing likes between hours since post. So you already get that, yeah, something with 13 likes, with posted only 1 hour ago would have a score of 13, while something with 20 likes scored, posted 2 hours ago would have a score of 10. And very easily you can see how you can get a much more complex feed algorithm with a very simple operation. And here we're also using a threshold to define that things that have more than 5 flags are obscured, maybe removed from the feed, maybe blurred out, or some other light moderation tool. So we can also see how this assessment framework can help communities to do collective curation and soft moderation of their feeds, just with this simple operation. Yeah, other interesting things you can do if you would have, for example, an upvote, downvote pair. You could have two different dimensions that come from the same assessments. So if you subtract the positive to the negative, you get a sort of sentiment score. So for example, 100 likes, 101 dislikes, you get a sentiment of -1. But you could also have a dimension of engagement. How much have people engaged with this post, regardless of their assessment is positive or negative? Go to the next one. And you can see how, yeah, the value is completely different, right? So you could have two different contexts, two different feeds, where you see each one, or you can combine them into one context where you have a combination of both, or whatever, yeah, your community feels like doing. And this is what we call the SenseMaker dashboard. This is what communities can see all of their assessments being done in their groups. How are users, members of a neighborhood, assessing a specific resource? What have they used? When? Sort of like making it transparent for the community to see how the algorithms are working and what other members are assessing. Yeah, I'm sure you are all having like super exciting ideas. These are very simple examples. And I'm looking forward to hear what you have in mind with this. Also, this is I'm showing like very simple math operations also because this is what we can actually do right now. We can only do very simple math operations, but this is already code that is working. If you are holochain savvy at least, which not many people are. But if you do, then please talk to me. Yeah. So you can see how we conceptualize sense making as a paradigm of social coordination, doing resource assessment, doing collective content curation, having light moderation tools, and some casual decision making. Not super blockchain hardcore, but more casual stuff. Yeah, the next thing I want to talk about is not at all ready, but I'm bringing it up because it's in the pipeline and it's relevant to the coordination topic. It's the concept of badges. Yeah, badges are modifiers upon members that signal, I don't know, if we want to acknowledge someone's expertise, if we want to acknowledge someone's exemplary behavior, we can emit a badge. Badges can be given manually by moderators or admins or community activators. For example, you could have an expert badge that has a modifier on your assessments. So as an expert, when you're assessing in this context, your likes are valued at one quarter more than most, right? 25% extra on your scoring capacity. So that's one way of acknowledging someone's expertise and bringing that into a specific actionable effect on the visibility of resources. This can get super crazy, of course. So you could have a pipeline of creating what we consider appreciated post, for example. So something that has positive sentiment larger than 10, we consider that an appreciated post by the community. And if you've had 5 of those in the last 1 month, that means you're appreciated contributor, right? So you could have pipelines to create badges, either manually or automatically, to convey, create like a group-centric reputation system where we acknowledge others in our community. Yeah, so all of these affordances, more than anything, come from building on top of Holochain, which I will not go super deep into because we have people who are possibly better than me at doing that. But what I want to say is that building on Holochain allows us to have cryptographically secured on-chain social data, not on a global blockchain, but on a local source chain for each community. What does this mean, or what we find really important about this in neighborhoods is that we are building the social computational fabric that we're operating on, right? These are distributed apps. We are running our community. Our devices are holding our data. Our devices are performing the computation on our assessments and our community interactions. We find this super important, super necessary, that you as a community are in control of your own social data. This also means, because we're building on Holochain, that there's no global consensus. So there's no single monolithic vision of what is the truth. That means it is a contingent reality, socially produced in a local context. It allows it to be scalable much more easily than on blockchains, but it also brings it challenges, right? One of the main challenges is, if you have no global consensus, then how do you do sense making across communities? Until now, we've only seen operations of how to do sense making internally, like within a single community. But how would we do this across communities? So for that, we are proposing the sense maker. The sense maker is a shared data schema for social metadata. So what does that mean? It means that each group, each neighborhoods, has a sense maker inside of their group. It's a Holochain DNA with a specific pattern of how to record the social data. So the data that comes from assessments in this case, right? You put this in a specific place in your code, and then because each neighborhood has the same structure for their social data, you can start to do operations between them. Next slide. Yeah, so you don't have to do like analyze the data of all the activity in the group. You only need to analyze the data within the sense maker, and we are also gonna provide like specific operations that you can do on this data. So there will be like a API that groups can, or coders can implement for specific sense-making operations. What does this mean? Yeah, good question. Uh, we're trying to figure it out, but we have a few ideas. Yeah, please continue. Like a what? Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's prime time for those kinds of operations, yeah. Yeah, yeah. So, for example, one very specific thing that you can do with the sense maker is to reinterpret the assessment that a community is using. So, for example, let's say we have an urban farming community that is using a range to assess the posts, and we want to bring that to a local coast agricultural group that uses a 3 emoji reaction system. The local coast agriculture can import the resources from another community into their posts because they find them relevant. They want to also see what these people are talking about. They've agreed that they want to share this data, and they want to translate the way in which the culture from one group translates to the other. So they define a threshold, right? Like, okay, if your posts are from 0 to 0.33, it's one emoji. In the middle, it's another emoji. If it's high up, it's another emoji. This is a very, very simple example. But what I want you to get from this is that communities can choose how to interpret the social data of other communities. It is up to each community to recontextualize what the other community is bringing in. Next slide, please. And you can do this across communities, right? You can bring data from other communities. Communities decide what they want to expose, what they want to make available for communities to be able to import, and you can decide to bridge across communities. You build this bridge. We're thinking of having some standards for assessments, so it would be easier if we are using the same algorithm for likes for a feed, then it's super straightforward to import those. But if not, that's totally fine. We can create a custom bridge between communities so that they decide how to interpret other communities' data. Next, please. Yeah, and we can of course do this with badges as well, right? Like this is a super straightforward example. So if you have a surf community and someone has a surfer instructor badge there, you can assume that person is maybe a local in the area, so you can give them a local badge in your community. If you have an expert in urban farming, maybe in the agriculture group, that's just a home grower badge. And maybe that badge only allows you access to certain places in that community, or gives you a modifier on certain posts, or whatever you can think about. But this is how we're thinking of doing sense making in a context of no global consensus, right? How do we bridge social data in a way that's contingent to the reality of each group? So yeah, where are we now? We have an alpha coming in a few months with a version 0.00001 of the launcher, the wizard, and the dashboard. We have a light version of the SenseMaker, so you can do already some social operations, like some social data operations, like the divide, multiply, larger than, some basic stuff. We will have customizable assessments for resources, and we will have a couple of applets ready, the chat and the feed, which will be very modular and will serve as templates for other applets to be built. Yeah, and after that, in the not so distant future, we'll start releasing the Bazaar, which is this marketplace with a social fabric. We want to start onboarding pilot communities, linking them with developers, developing open source modules that can be part of the library of applets that any community can utilize. Yeah, next slide, please. So this is more general, just my thoughts, not necessarily neighborhood's thoughts on how I see a Web3 coordination stack forming. So I personally believe that we should be using peer-to-peer apps for the social part. So everything that we're doing in Google Docs, Discord, Telegram, we should be doing on peer-to-peer, open source, cryptographically secured infrastructure. I think this layer should be local, agent-centric, aim for eventual consistency, and where we don't have universal view of data, right? And as you go further up, you have more formalizing structures that rely on blockchains. So I would like to see DAO tools for these apps. Not only neighborhoods, there's plenty of tools building in this space, and I think we should aim to get these bridges going, because then you can also interoperate through them, right, between peer-to-peer applications. So DAO tools, NFTs, formal decision-making, tokenomics, and then on top of that, yeah, sometimes we have to move money around in the entire world. Cool, we can use blockchains and global consensus for that. Yeah, but on the bottom you have like high trust communities. On the top you have trustless infrastructure. Yeah, that's one way of looking at it. Next one, please. Yeah, please. Use the mic.
On the governance day, we'll be demoing kind of a soft DAO tool set for helping like generate things. So that's that middle layer with some of the DAO tools and that kind of stuff that's built on Holochain.
Yeah, really, really looking forward for those Holochain demos. I was scared to death to do one myself, so yeah, happy heart is here. Yeah, so what I'm thinking for specific ways in which we can start bridging neighborhoods to this broader ecosystem. Yeah, I would like to see DAO tools for neighborhoods, that it would be easy to spin up a multi-sig and start doing DAO things. I've been thinking about this and I'm not super sure. These are like open questions that I would like to talk with all of you about. What about exporting social graphs and trust graphs and using something like the Lens protocol, or I don't know, or doing data commons, like what you were referring to, Scott. Exporting that from the local source chain and using it in some other ways. Having a broader sort of co-fi, refi economic modules that are pluggable by neighborhoods. We've talked about this a couple of times in this place, about building a Cosmos Holochain interface layer. How could that look? How could we bridge the two worlds? Maybe how we could turn badges into NFTs. I don't know, maybe soulbounds or something like that. And then plugging into all of that ecosystem of NFT tools. Yeah, so where to find more and connect? You can join yet another Discord, yay. Woo! Yeah. You can also check out our white paper with some very recent updates. You can also check our recent demo for the Holochain ecosystem session. It was posted a week ago, I think, and it's showing what will be available in the alpha in a couple of months. And this is a personal wish of mine. I am interested in talking with people who are doing user experience for distributed systems. How does it look to do good user experience in patterns of eventual consistency, in decentralized applications? Yeah, how does that look? How can we make this usable, friendly, and amazing to use? Yeah, you can also send us an email. I'll be sharing some of these in the Telegram. And yeah, that's kind of it. Thank you.
Yeah, we have 20 minutes for questions. Just want to do a organizers slash topic day question. What are your thoughts on coordinations? How you see neighborhoods in the context of coordinations? And yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, my wish in terms of coordinations for neighborhoods is that it can act as a form of implementation of this principle of subsidiarity. I don't know if you've heard of that principle. Yeah, sort of like that issues are dealt with the most local context that they are affecting. I think Holochain in general and neighborhoods in particular can enable groups to really keep their agency local and scale up as needed. So how can collectivity and social coordination emerge from bottom up? Yep.
Hello. Hello. Okay. So when can we start using the neighborhoods application? And is it necessary to have any relayer server, or how does this locally produced data get to the other users of the neighborhood?
Yeah, so I guess you're asking about like packaging the app in a friendly way. There is efforts in doing that in Holochain. At the moment, neighborhoods, you would need to be a bit tech savvy to get it running. I assume for the alpha, it will be easier for people who can use a bit of the command line to get it going, but as in like general public, I would say maybe 6 months at least, maybe more. And I also want to be like super, I don't know, I don't want to waste community's time. Like you're tech savvy, you can start using it sooner. But for this to be usable by communities doing critical stuff, I would say a bit longer, probably a year. Yeah. The packaging,
If it's necessary to have a relayer server that is
no.
also just the peers, as they are connected to the network, they will be relaying the information to the other peers.
Yeah, that's correct. That's more of a holochain affordance, not a neighborhoods one, but yeah, that's correct.
But if I understand correctly, the idea in Holochain is also to have some nodes that are going to be kept online, so that if people are not connected, then there can be information passed on.
Are you referring to the
Holochain.
Not the Holo
Well, I
hosting
don't
service?
know.
Yeah, I mean, of course, people who are online longer can transfer information, act as a witness, and just like relay information. But yeah, maybe Art can give you a thorough answer.
Try not to stand right in front of the speaker and get feedback. Yeah, so you don't need a server, you don't need any kind of special relay. When you write things to your local state, you then publish them to the DHT, and other nodes split up the work of sharing those things. So you don't have to be online for your data to be discoverable, but you had to be online at some point to publish it to others.
Yeah, a little question on top of this. What are the requirements what will be the requirements at the user level? They will have to, hey, download another app, or just go to your regular browser and interact with neighborhood?
Yeah, that's a good question. In the immediate future, download an app for sure. Download the launcher and install applets within the launcher. But at some point, hopefully, when the Holo hosting service is provided, you could do so within a browser for sure. But I don't have a timeline for that. Maybe someone does.
And the second question is, do you already have some monetization model? Do you plan to?
Yeah, so at the moment, what we're thinking is that we will be mediating in the bazaar, basically. So everything will be open source, but the bazaar is the place where we will be monetizing small transaction fees for how connecting applet developers and communities, facilitating that through an currency, like an ERC20 token that we have. But that's still, I don't know, like it's still up to see. It's not a business model that I love. I would like to see something where we just like create a game and then we play it too. So sort of like be participants in the bazaar as anyone else would be, and get paid to develop modules for the ecosystem. That's personally what I would like to see, but that's not up for me.
I would like to share some ideas, but maybe.
That would be great. I would love that.
I have a question about the badges. How are they earned or taken away or verified?
Yeah, that's a good question. Still, it's like a huge design space, right? But we're thinking right now of having them either manually allocated by admins or moderators, or having them have a automated pipeline to give them to people. How are they revocated? they could have rules for revocation. So some of them, for example, the one I showed where it was the most appreciated post in the last 5 months or something, I don't remember. If you don't hold that in the next month, you lose that badge, right? And with that, you lose the sort of like whatever it afforded you to do. So there's, again, automated revocancy of the badges, and there's also, I assume, manual one, but that's up to each neighborhood to decide. We will be hopefully providing tools to make that easily customizable.
Do you have a relationship with Hilo? And I'm curious about the interaction there, just given like the history of the social network on Holochain.
Yeah, I mean, we are aware with Hilo, and there's connections within the team, but not really at a term of, in terms of doing any interoperability or, yeah, talking about integrating them, or, yeah, not really at that level. But we like them quite a lot.
A couple of questions. First one about the per neighborhood sense maker. Are they an individual within that community, i.e. they hold the responsibilities? So if that's the case, will you need some mechanisms to deal with corruptibility of that individual?
Yeah, the sense maker is not an individual. It's a piece of code inside each group. Should I repeat? Okay. The sense maker is a piece of code within each group. So it's a holochain DNA within each group, or even each applet. We're kind of figuring that out. And the idea is that it's just a data schema to have your social data in a specific format, and some operations that you can perform upon that social schema, basically. So it is not an individual, and how things get decided, which is the question of corruptibility. At the moment, we have this figure of the community activator. So the community activator is the person who starts a neighborhood and sets it up and starts inviting people and holds some moderation and administration power. We have a pipeline. I'm pushing for this pipeline of progressive decentralization of the community activator figure, so it can become sort of a collective thing. We don't know exactly how this will look, but at the moment, yeah, there is the possibility of the community activator just, yeah, going rogue, for sure.
Okay, second question was, sense making looks like it'll be most useful when you have a lot of resources to analyze. Are you interested in bootstrapping by importing Web2 resources?
Good question. Yeah, we're considering it. We're definitely considering it. There's no definite answer on that, but could be an option for sure. And yeah, it is true that the most interesting sense-making operations happen when you have a lot of data. But even for the to-do applet that we've been using, it's already super nice, right? Like you as a team can be like, hey, what do we have to do? Let's assess this, and you can just see things float to the top. Even if it's a group of 6 people, you can already start to see some useful sense-making.
So first, I put a serious hat on and make a short comment. This relates to the bazaar. Oh, sorry, yeah, more like how fucking close I have to put this. So, okay, the serious hat and comment on relating to the bazaar. In terms of you being just a member in the bazaar, is actually something very worthwhile to look at. Like when I was doing more serious work on a vacuum metaverse economy, this was one thing I gathered some soft data. There was no direct, like, here's a case where it works, but there was a lot of soft data that points out that this is actually rather powerful. Many platforms are somewhat afraid of doing it. They want to be higher up. But when you saw somebody going towards that direction, it almost seemed to be a positive. So that's the serious hat. Then the gesture hat comes in, and I throw you a question that I try to make hard. So the question being, now, there is an interesting possibility in the structures that you're talking about of, let's say, like this nesting of communities. Like community becomes like a cluster community, then becomes even higher level of community. Have you thought about the structuring of those, and what would be, say, patterns of interactions between 5 communities, and how would they differ? And like, what would be the, let's say, the design palette or models of such kind of super communities or super communities?
Yeah, great question. I think, yeah, this is something we are still trying to figure out, and it mostly, I think, depends on where you draw the membrane of the communities, like what is constituted as a community. Because if you go even, you atomize it a bit lower down, you could even have communities where you're only part of the applets you install. So you might be part of a community where there's a million things people are, I don't know, there's a marketplace, people are selling and buying things, people have, I don't know, they're chatting about certain topics you don't care about. You might not even install those applets and just go there to play chess, let's say. And then you might only be coordinating with those people in terms of your chess playing. And then you could be sort of like playing chess across communities. You could be playing chess with another community as well, be on their leaderboard. Let's say they're sharing their assessments on the players in their chess communities. So if you do that, then you even have like this more fragmented approach, where it's not so much as a nesting, I would say, as much as it is like a networking of communities. But there is also the potential of having these more nested features. Let's say, for example, there's a horror film community and there's a comedy film community that they're really into their own niches. But then there's just like people who like watching films every now and then, and they could bring from those niche communities their top movies of the month, right? Just that context. Maybe those niche communities are doing many other things, sense making, entire catalogs of movies. You just want a bit of that. And you can have sort of like a federated film appreciation community that brings stuff from other niche communities. That feels more like a nesting. So I would personally hope that there's the possibility of using both patterns, like a nesting and a network and whatever is in between. But that's a huge challenge, and I can already see the developers like,
Yeah,
being
like the
mad
one
at
thing
me.
to look at, this is a short comment, I promise, is look at the different paradigms. Like, for example, games have an enter-exit paradigm, which is often lighter, and treating a super community kind of more like a game, that we go here and then we go out, might be useful as a pattern.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want, not exactly a question, more like an answer to him and also to something he said. He just basically already said it, but in the sense maker and in the way to stack assessments and relationships between communities, you already have basically a pretty affordance-rich environment to stack communities, if you will, by making sure the inputs and outputs of the different communities have some kind of relationship to each other. So you don't really need to identify this as a super or a sub-community, but rather, here is what we share into that community, here's what we take from them, and how do these things go through a transformation process between them. And then the other thing is also, you can fork communities, right? So you don't need to assure that a community activator cannot possibly corrupt a community, because you have all the data locally between all the members, meaning that if somebody goes rogue, you just fork the community and you have somebody else be the community activator for that, with all the history of the community still intact. So you don't need to do the sort of hardcore, let's make sure nobody can affect anything kind of thing.
Totally. Thank you for that.
Could I maybe, we spoke a little bit about this earlier, but I would say there's this, yeah, there's another question there. There's a little snake underlying this, like sense making and the kind of the data thing. Like if you don't have a strong, let's say, some type system, this is a problem also in like climate modeling, let's say, like so cloud cover maybe is done like on a daily basis, but then some soil stuff is done on a yearly basis, and we don't really know how to like unify these things. So while it seems in this example where you had just a number and you convert it into 3 values and then you convert the 3 values back into a number, okay, this works. But if you start building up higher and higher, at some point you're going to run into these same problems. And there's a different form of consensus needed there, which is like how do you model or how do you express this data? And this went like really, it got really screwed up in like the semantic web. You see that kind of doesn't work. Yeah, and I would say like it's a golden opportunity to actually think a little bit about the type system before you start sort of allowing all kinds of data. It's like very, yeah, you'd want to do that, but you're gonna run into problems trying to unify this. So maybe first need to think a little bit like some type system where you have units and ways to form bigger types out of smaller types and stuff like this. So it remains sensible at like a, yeah. It's
That's
just a
great.
warning, but I will
Yeah,
talk
no, great. I don't have like the technical knowledge to assess if that's the case, but I can put you in contact with our developers.
Actual last question, I think. So one of the core concepts in the coordination framework is this idea of interweaving, of sort of communities being like creating interdependence between them. One of the things that you have spoken about is, of course, how do they communicate with one another? But is there anything in mind for, like, one of the phrases that you'll probably hear Primavera say later is, like, how do you get, like, communities need to share blood with one another? That's almost like you're engaging in the process of becoming one. My thinking, or the thing that I think that we've most thought about and how that looks through distributed systems is, like, sharing of assets in some way or form. Is that something in the protocol that you guys are doing, these groups?
What's
We're going to
happening
talk
later?
about coordinations later? Woo. Is that what you mean?
At 11:30 here, so don't miss it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think this sharing of assets could happen at 2 places. So one of them is this sense making of the resources, right? If one community shares a resource and another community feeds off that resource and its social data, then you have a notion of shared assets at the layer of communication, right? But on top of that, if we go to like sort of like more formalized tools, I could see modules for mutual staking, for example, so that communities who are monetizing their efforts in any way could start sharing some of the risk together, for example. Or many other more economic modules of asset sharing. But at the level of neighborhoods, I think it's more on the social data and digital resource side. Yeah.
So I guess the question is like how you build the, was it the second level stack on top of neighborhoods is the...
Yeah. I'm hoping that very soon we will see like a whole set of economic tools built on top of Holochain around mutual credit and local currencies and some of that things. So I'm hoping that's kind of like the first economic layer, and then you can go to sort of like a blockchain layer on top of that if needed. But hopefully we will see more local solutions that just rely on peer-to-peer infrastructure.
Yeah. Thank you, Pablo. Thank you. Thank you, Neighbors and Holochain, for sponsoring this event, and Holochain for being the infrastructure on top of Neighbors so that they can sponsor CCG. We are taking a 20 minutes coffee break, and then we start with a workshop of 1.5 hours on coordinations. So it's better if you participate the whole time, because entering in the middle could disrupt like the dynamics. See you there in time, sharp. Yes. Here. Coordination. Hello, hello. Is it feedbacky? Hello, hello. I am Giulio, and I'm testing this Zoom call. I can continue forever to test this call. So funny. It's not bad, no?
It's getting better.
I'm doing a presentation, I speak like this, there are slides. No?
Well, it's getting better, but still, it's not enjoyable.
It's a process, man.
I know, of course.
Joking. Coordinations. It's decent, no? Yeah. Oh. Hello, hello. No, no, it's not. Okay. Okay, you can try yourself. I start recording the people. Wow, wow, wow. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 12, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26. I'm here, okay.
Wait,
Giulio, komm, bitte. Giulio. Giulio. La, 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 la. So, Giulio. Now the presentation is on Zoom. Yeah. Then it will be Primavera connected via Zoom.
Then, or not now? Okay.
We can do the video there from the laptop and the audio from the. Yeah, we can do it.
Let's wait.
Even if it's just the audio, it's okay, but there is no hurry, no? You can.
We can get audio.
Hello.
She's trying to use the mic. Take it.
Hello. Why are you reading again?
What? Test? Test.
Yeah, it's fun. There's an echo again.
That wasn't me.
I don't know what it is. Hello.
That's their fault. Am I echoing? Turn off your phone, Julio. No, we need it for the live stream.
Okay.
Does it work?
Hello. It's working now.
No. We good? We can start. Okay. Hi everyone, my name is Josh Davila. You may know me from a no longer pseudo-anonymous avatar on social media called The Blockchain Socialists. It's a podcast and a blog. Last year I met Primavera Di Filippi when I was living in Paris, and we got into a discussion, and we talked about, oh, this new book called The Network State is coming out from Balaji. It sounds really dumb, but it also has like interesting seeds in it that are probably going to resonate with a lot of people in crypto. And so she was like, oh, what if we did a podcast about it? And I was like, I have a podcast, let's do it on mine. And so we started discussing and thinking about how to kind of tackle sort of the ideas and concepts that were being addressed or hinted at in the network state. And so from that, we started a podcast series called Overthrowing the Network State, which was meant to kind of criticize a lot of these concepts that are in this book. This book being something that had gained a lot of attention and a lot of people in the crypto world resonated with, but we found still like much fewer people had actually read the book. So we provided kind of a podcast for people to not have to read the book, but start to understand what are the concepts that Balaji tries to expand on and why we think those are maybe problematic and not actually what a lot of kind of, I would say, ostensibly progressive-minded people would be interested in when it comes to crypto. And then we continued, and part of that process was to create an alternative concept or framework to think about some of these ideas, or seeds of ideas really, that are hinted at in the network state, because a lot of them are not new. A lot of them were actually things thought about in crypto world since like kind of the very beginning. And so yeah, we continued that, and we got lucky enough to be invited to Zuzalu, which is like this 2-month kind of thing that Vitalik and the Ethereum Foundation hosted, and we were able to, for about like a week and a half we were there, and able to expand on this idea and really hone down what it is that makes a coordination or alternative different from a network state. And so it was a really nice experience for this aspect. Other aspects I'm critical of, but I won't go into that. And yeah, since then we're trying to like build more and more on this concept and try to share it with more people to help us think about it more, and as well to think about the actual kind of technical mechanisms to make it more of a reality. And so part of this, kind of thing that we're doing, one of the major concepts that we think needs like a rethinking of is this idea of sovereignty, and whether or not and how sovereignty is expressed, and kind of pushing back on this assumption that sovereignty is something that is ultimate, that you have ultimate sovereignty because you have a state, or they have a nation state. And so we're kind of pushing back on this idea and trying to have a lot more nuance. We were talking yesterday that we're trying to queer sovereignty, because sometimes sovereignty is often seen as like either you have it or you don't, because you have a state or you do not. And this kind of like is a common trap for a lot of people who like to have really big ideas, like Balaji, and it's not necessarily a bad thing to have big ideas that are kind of silly, but it is kind of a bad thing whenever this person has a lot of money and a lot of influence and power, which is why we felt it was necessary to kind of push back against it. So yeah, so for this presentation, we want to talk about sovereignty and kind of how it's usually thought about, how it's thought about in the network state, and how we're kind of trying to have a different way of thinking about sovereignty. And then afterwards, Primavera will give a presentation, probably through Zoom, I guess, about coordinations in more detail. So for this presentation, we're trying to like build the foundations for kind of what we're trying to get at when we're talking and expanding on coordinations as a concept.
Yeah, and I guess hopefully, can you hear me? So, I mean, hopefully after this conversation, we also can co-create what do we want to touch upon in the afternoon through workshops. So, first of all, my name is Sofia. I'm very, very grateful to be here in such a beautiful space. It's my first time at the Crypto Commons Hub. I am a researcher at BlockchainGov. BlockchainGov is led by Primavera de Filippi, who is here in spirit and online. She's watching the stream, and she will join us very soon. I would love for us to start first taking a deep breath. That's how I start all my talks, because it will be a bit of academic-y explaining for a while. So, okay, now we can talk shit about Balaji. You can move. So, what I would love for us to do today is to dig into 3 models of sovereignty. The first one, this fancy word, Westphalian sovereignties, is what we know today, state nations. The second one is the Wallachian network state. And the third one is the one that we propose, which is new network sovereignties. So the trick here is to see them comparatively through some categories, and that is a very brief history of how they came to be, what are the core principles, some praise and critiques around them, but more importantly, how power transfer happens within these 3. And an important note is the model 1 is what we have, it's descriptive, it exists. The second one is sort of like an aspiration of what we can create according to Balaji. And the third one is a mix. So it's inspired on things that are happening today, but it also adds a direction on where we want to go in the future. So basically, the Westphalian sovereignties or systems, they came to be in the 1648. It was a historical moment when simply a bunch of European powers were involved in a series of religious, political, and territorial disputes. They got tired of fighting. They gathered in Westphalia, basically closer to North Germany. They held talks for 4 years, and they adopted 2 treaties, the Westphalian treaties. And that is important because the principles enshrined in those treaties basically laid the foundations for the next almost 400 years in international relations and international law. We could say until the Cold War. So the principles can be seen as follows. So after the 2 treaties were adopted, sovereignty, or the way that power, authority, and the capacity to dictate one's affairs was linked to the ultimate sovereign that wasn't the church or wasn't the empire, and in this case was the nation state, but a particular type of nation state. It was located in the global north. And sovereignty after Westphalia, and as we know it today, is actually a status. And that status is linked to whatever entity displays statehood. And by that we mean simply population, a defined territory, a government, and a capacity to conduct international relations. Sovereignty also, very importantly, is recognized under the law, right? And that means that it can be enforced endogenously within the state and outside the state through the monopoly of the use of force. So, how is governance happening within nation states? And with this is sort of like an official, So governance, this slide is wrong, but I can say it. So how is governance happening within the nation states? And with this it's sort of like we can see it in 2 periods. The first period, when we just started having this international community of nation states, power was centralized. So the power was taken away from the church, taken away from the empire, and sort of like gathered around this figure of the autocrat, of the monarch, who could dictate basically all the affairs within the state. And with that, I'm talking about governance and taxation and the deployment of the military. And then after Enlightenment, and if we remember the sort of 18th century revolutions in America and in France, what we had was a so-called democratization of power, with constitutions coming to be and setting up rights and freedoms for the people within it, or at least that is what we are meant to believe through the mainstream history. And how did development evolve within the nation states? Again, the way that we produce, distribute, and consume goods and services. We went through different phases. So in the beginning, it was about mercantilism, so accumulation of wealth through precious metals. Then we had industrialization. Then we went into free market economy with private ownership of the means of production. Then with globalization, most importantly in globalization, what happened is that some countries became price makers in the global north and in the center, and some others became price takers, particularly in the global south and in the periphery. And most recently, what we've seen in terms of our economy is that specific sectors became more predominant. One of them around the 80s, it was finance, and now most recently, everything around digital technologies. Now, how do individuals become a part of nation states and what brings them together? The membership in this type of system is around the nation, and in a nation, the entry is basically involuntary. You cannot opt in, you're just a member of it. And the cost is, again, is relatively low. You just happen to be in one of them. Now, to exit a nation, that is almost relatively non-negotiable unless you have money enough to buy citizenship in St. Kitts. So it is actually very high cost. And the bond of the members within the nation is basically formed around a common history and in-person interactions. Now, how do nation states relate to one another? So, according to the law, all the sovereigns are equal and independent, and there is an obligation of non-intervention in the affairs of one another. But in reality, what we see is that sovereigns are not equal, are actually unequal, and their relations are exploitative and codependent, with some of them basically being able to set up the political, economic, and legal rules of the game, and other sovereigns having to follow them. So what this means, and with this is like I give a very unofficial overview of the last 400 years, is that what happened was we started out in the Middle Ages with the dominance of the church and the empire, and then through Westphalia we gave the power to the monarch, and then through Enlightenment and the revolutions of the 18th century, we gave it to the bourgeoisie. I can never say that word, but you know what I'm talking about, the bad guys. We give it to them, and then most recently, that power was transferred to new elites, including industrial and financial elites. So, what happens with this model? Well, there are people that praise it and there are people that critique it. So the liberals would usually say, well, you know, this system fosters a balance of power. You know, it allows us in the end to have some sort of peaceful coexistence compared to before, and well, you know, the rules that we put in place embrace some level of cultural diversity and facilitates cooperation through diplomacy. But the post-colonialists would say, well, actually, no, because this system it took place in the peak when European colonialism was peaking, and it was built in order to enforce and reproduce this Eurocentrism, basically reinforcing the division between the colonizer and the colonized and disregarding the agency and self-determination of non-Western people.
Okay. Do you want to do the slides? So now I'll talk a bit about the Balajian vision of the network state, and I think it's important in order to understand the conceptual framework that he's proposing in his book, is understand a little bit about him. He was a kind of Stanford classic, like bachelor's, master's, PhD, go through Stanford University, was a computer scientist, and then, you know, of course, switched over to startups. He started a biotech company, which he sold for like $300 million. He made a lot of money. He became a venture capitalist for Andreessen Horowitz, which is one of the top Silicon Valley venture capital firms in the US. One of the interesting things about him is that he's had these ideas for quite a long time. So in 2013, he did a talk at Y Combinator called Silicon Valley's Ultimate Exit, where he proposed to a lot of these startup bros, like, hey, why don't we leave the United States, start building these types of territories outside that are allowed to exist outside of the regulatory sort of purview of the United States, and there we can finally, go all into technological innovation, and we're going to live the lives that we want to lead. We're going to live forever. We're going to do all the things that libertarians like to do. Everything will be done through free markets. He's been a very big proponent for a long time. He's really obsessed with talking about networks for everything, but with a seemingly kind of rudimentary idea, in my opinion, of what networks are. But yeah, so he, and then he was also the CTO of Coinbase for a little bit because he had a crypto startup that they bought. He's been very influential in Silicon Valley for a long time, and as well on the crypto industry. And so we can go through just like a couple of the definitions of the network state. So what's actually fairly straightforward and nice about the book is that he gives a definition in a sentence, like in a paragraph, in like a picture, and in an essay. And so we can actually pull from that to know more about what exactly he means. So network states is a highly aligned online community with a capacity for collective action that crowdfunds territory around the world and eventually gains diplomatic recognition from pre-existing states. So he's saying we can create a community online that has some sort of similar attributes or would like to see the world in a certain way, and then we can buy land and turn that into a state, essentially diplomatically recognized institution. And then he also has this longer definition with more things, that it should be an archipelago. It can be an archipelago of crowdfunded physical territory, so it doesn't have to be contiguous. It can exist in different places, and we would use cryptocurrency to facilitate transactions with one another, and blockchains to do an on-chain census to know everybody, and yeah, so it's a very kind of it has very techno-utopian kind of ideals for creation of new states. What's, I think, super important to understand as well is that Balaji has a lot of connections to a guy named Curtis Yarvin. He is the founder of Urbits, and he is also considered one of the founding philosophers of the Dark Enlightenment, or the alt-right. So a lot of the kind of newer right-wing online movements especially come from this guy and his writing. Yeah. So he's considered, by some people, a neo-fascist, and he has also a lot of connections with venture capital firms in Silicon Valley, including Andreessen Horowitz and including Venture Fund, funded by Peter Thiel, who's also a big promoter of a lot of right-wing ideals in the US. So if you go next. And so the Dark Enlightenment is this idea of being against the cathedral, they call it, which is this, I don't know, they think of it as this enclosed elite group of academics, of what else, government, media, elite. So there's a lot of kind of there's anti-government stuff, but then there's a lot of kind of anti-Semitic overtones to a lot of things. It's also very anti-egalitarian, so they do not believe in democracy. They believe it should not, that it is an inferior form of governance. They have, of course, very traditional ideas about the roles of sex and gender. They call themselves race realists, so they won't say that they're racists. They're just realistic about race. They really like monarchistic aesthetics a lot of the times, which is kind of ironic because they're against the cathedral, which also is a very monarchistic whatever. Curtis Yarvin specifically likes to quote this guy Thomas Carlyle, who's an extremely racist historian. It's man, it's bad. And yeah, so there's this sense of kind of being very anti-elite, but at the same time very technocratic. So they are against this form of elite, government, media, academic, who apparently rule the world, and instead they believe the world should be run by people like them, who are good with computers and good at math, and they should be the ones who run the world society. And so Curtis Yarvin wrote a book before the network states. I think it was in 2008, I want to say, or 2014, I can't remember, called Patchwork. And Patchwork, in this kind of way that he's trying to show what the world should be like, he's saying we should divide the world into much, much smaller neo-states, he calls them, or mini-states, and each of them are run by a corporation, and they're run like a monarchy, and they're run as a dictatorship. he's very explicit about it. He said the design is all exit and no voice. So it should be that we have basically a free market of little states that we can all choose to be a part of or not. But if you're a part of it, you're under that dictatorship. And so this is like a very, yeah, so he idealizes the Holy Roman Empire as being like the most peaceful time in history. Very dubious claim. And yeah, so each one should be governed by its own joint stock corporation. So the state should also be run for profit. Should be a for-profit entity that people opt into. And yeah, should be financially responsible. Basically saying the state should be run as a corporation. And so if we kind of compare and contrast what's in the book Patchwork or what's in the book The Network State, and the Network State references Curtis Yarvin's book several times. Like he talks about the cathedral, he talks about like, he references his work a lot. But so if we compare it, in Patchwork, there's like a very explicit saying we need a for-profit corporate state. In the Network State, it's kind of implicit, right? He doesn't say it's a for-profit entity. He's kind of like, oh, it can be whatever you want, but we need to have investors buy this piece of land in order to like create our domain. And if you're investing in something, you're like expecting a return, you're expecting a profit. And if that's like the origin of your like, you know, the foundations of your states, then you're implying that it's a for-profit entity. It's also, Patchwork, I would say, is explicitly imperialist and colonialist, while the Network State is kind of more implicit. In Patchwork, I mean, he says a lot of very racist things, like we should just get rid of, you know, insert minority here and make things, it'll make things more efficient, easier. He has like he's like a right-wing edgelord. He will like, it's kind of like, you know, he says something super racist and it's like, oh, is he joking? Is he not? I don't know. Which is like very, like if you were paying attention during like, I don't know, the rise of Trump, like that was like a lot of his online base were doing this kind of like edgelord racism. It's like, yeah, dog whistling, where it's like, oh, but it's just it's just a joke, you know, whatever. Yeah, right. So yeah, Patchwork, I would say, is openly reactionary, while the Network State is more of a reactionary framework. So you kind of have to like read between the lines. I think someone who does not know much about kind of reactionary history, then you may not necessarily identify it. So I think a lot of people have read the Network State and been like, oh, this is like a good progressive thing, you know? Because I think they don't recognize these things. In Patchwork, explicitly anti-democratic, exit only, no voice. In the Network State, he emphasizes exit a lot more than voice. But he's not explicit about any mention of governance, so he doesn't talk about governance at all. He just like said, the only kind of references is one time where he talks about the founders being able to stop, you know, someone who breaks the law, like stop them access to like the admin portal of their state or something like that. So like denying them access to housing through like their computer. And yeah, so in Patchwork, very pro-monarchy, it's called, he calls it neo-cameralism. Cameralism is like a type of political body which is run by a for-profit entity. This was, I believe, from the Prussian Empire. Prussian Empire was a for-profit corporation run. And he's very pro-tech elitism, so he thinks like Silicon Valley elites should run the world. He says that explicitly. And Balaji is a tech elite himself, and he wrote this book, which is very similar to Patchwork. So in the ideas of sovereignty in this, he's saying that the ultimate sovereign is no longer the nation state, but the network state. So he's kind of like trying to allude to, oh, well, now people are able to connect with one another over the internet more than they would their, you know, fellow citizens of the same country. That's not necessarily wrong. But you see that Balaji kind of tries to recreate this idea of ultimate sovereignty through just a different form of a state. And so yeah, the status, it's still here, sovereignty is a status displaying statehood. So it includes a permanent population, although it's very like online. There is a defined territory, even if it's non-contiguous. There is a government led by the founder, and there is capacity to conduct international relations between other network states, and you know, gaining diplomatic recognition means that you have some sort of interface with nation states. So governance, he doesn't explicitly propose anything. There seems to be a kind of centralization of power where the CEO founder kind of runs everything, and if you don't like it, you can leave because it's all exit. And And so he appeals to the ideas of a technocratic, kind of hopefully benevolent dictatorship, similar to Patchwork. You can choose which dictatorship you want to live under. And then it also implies a kind of oligarchy of like privileged people, because there is not much talk about how do you leave a network state, how do you join another one. Everything is kind of termed as kind of common sense. You would invest in something, you would like use your capital to do this or that. It's very implied. So yeah, he only says, yeah, you can contribute with their time or their money. Like which one do you think is going to be more powerful, huh? Development, so he has this kind of like conceptual framework of leviathans, of like, we had God, then we had state, and now we have network that sort of forces people to be pro-social. It's a very simplistic, in my view, kind of series of leviathans, but in that leviathan framework, he doesn't talk about capital as being something that is a leviathan, whenever in his book he also talks about the three like forms of capital: woke capital, communist capital, and crypto capital, as being like the three poles of power that are all fighting each other for domination. So somehow capital is always implied, but it's never analyzed. And so yeah, and he's very pro free market. So in terms of membership, it's there's a voluntary opt-in. So the cost is being a highly aligned community, although the exit is supposed to be a very low cost. I think for me, what I've kind of thought is that if there is a very low cost to exit, then probably what you are part of was not a community in the first place. A community is something that has interdependent relationships where it should be difficult for you to leave. That's kind of what defines a community. And so you would bond in person and online, and everything would be fostered through this shared vision around, it was called a moral innovation. So there has to be something that you all decide that you are highly aligned about, that you want to live your life according to. So he uses the example of like being keto, like being really into longevity, like kind of random, that are more just like niche interests as being the basis for the creation of a state. Yeah. System dynamics. So yeah, for them, network states are equal footing with nation states because they have diplomatic recognition, ideally, and they are also independent from nation states, of course, as well, is his ideal, because yeah, a big part of the original sort of presentation about the ultimate exit from Silicon Valley is like getting away from regulation of the FDA, getting away from regulation, like financial regulations. He's pretty explicit about that. And so the power transfer here is really imagining kind of like from the current elite to a new elite, the tech elite. So for me, it feels like Revenge of the Nerds. It's like, you know, finally the nerds in high school they get to be on top now. They're the top of the hierarchy because now everyone is like, you know, needing to be a computer scientist or whatever in order to be able to afford the rent. Sure, you can imagine that. This movie is actually kind of messed up as well because, yeah, I don't want to go. There's some weird like, I don't know. I think this is from like the 80s or 90s, and yeah, the nerds definitely like sexually harassed girls, and it's like presented as being like this cool thing. That's a weird movie. Anyways.
Do you want to go? So
There's one more, no?
There's one more?
Yeah.
Oh, Bryson, good.
And so Balaji, we can probably say pretty safely, is a libertarian. He has his own kind of like strand of libertarianism. Not all libertarians will agree with Balaji. We've talked to people on the podcast who are libertarians who disagree. Similar to socialists, they rarely agree on everything. And so if you're on Balaji's side, you'll say that politics has failed. We need to separate each other in order to live peacefully, because we cannot sort of resolve these major conflicts. I had a conversation at Zuzalu with one of the people who are helping him write the next edition of the Network State, and he was telling me like, oh, you know, how do you deal with what if you don't want to live next to a gay person? Like, how are you supposed to solve that problem? Because like they're Muslim or something like that. And so like that's kind of like the basis. It's like a very like baby level understanding of like these types of things, and as if we're unable to resolve conflict and people don't live in like diverse communities. And so I think on the other side, at least I would say that the system is sort of designed to fail most people, and separation is kind of, separation would make it worse probably. Balaji says we need a state to fight the state. Of course, not all libertarians will say this, and for me, I think it's more that there are many ways to fight the state. They will say that free markets are non-coercive, that if you're in a market system that you have the choice or the option to buy or sell, you know, you're not coerced into anything, you have the option to buy like necessary medicine or not, or to buy food or not. It's your choice, bro. Whereas I would say the markets under capitalism are quite coercive. If the things that you need to survive are run on a market, it's a very coercive system. You have to take part in that market in order to be able to afford the things, in order to live. And then they're also very techno-utopian. They'll say accelerate technological innovations at all costs, and that'll solve all of our problems because we'll live forever, da-da-da. And I think for socialists, it would be that technological innovation owned in the hands of elites is more likely to hurt the lower classes and to benefit those who own that actual, the means of production of technological innovation. So yeah, I think that's it.
Okay, so who here has read The Network State? Any of you? Some of you? Nice. Yeah, I think the point is, like, to play devil's advocate, I think people were drawn to reading it because some of us feel that the current system is failing to us, right? And what we discovered through this analysis is that the network state very much replicates a lot of the issues of the current state and becomes narrower because development is only through free market, because governance is only apparently through a more centralized version of it. And not only that, it's narrower and I would say a little bit unfeasible. I think it's techno-utopian at best. So that is to say, this is not, you don't need to be necessarily ideological about your position on the network state. I think that is a pretty clear structural deficiency. So the third model, like I said before, is inspiring things that are happening today, but expanding on them to new horizons. And perhaps something we didn't add is we are influenced, and by we I say the team that has worked around these issues with Josh Primavera and many of us, we are influenced by executional theory, for example. I don't know if you read about it, and by actually living in new network sovereignties. So what is this about? So I don't know if you know Cabin. Have you heard about them? I don't want to speak about Cabin because I haven't lived there, and I think I wouldn't be making it justice. But basically, the idea is that digital communication technologies and decentralized social technologies, including blockchain, have enabled new modes of organization that embody a new way of understanding sovereignty and scale. And what happens is it creates denationalized spaces for authority that are formed as distributed networks of interwoven localities where membership and participation are voluntary, decisions are made bottom up, and we produce, exchange, and consume goods and services underpinned by a sense of social purpose. And this includes, like, Cabin Network is, for example, a cohabitational distributed space, but I think, look no further, I think this is a very interesting example of a node of a new network sovereignty. So what does this mean? Amazing, amazing. So I think a key point here is that for the new network sovereignty conception, there is no ultimate sovereign. What we have is multiple coexisting ones. And one of those sovereigns are network communities. They don't care, they don't give a shit about replacing the network state. We live in parallel with them or on top of them or bottom, whatever we prefer. But the point is that we embody a fundamentally different mode of political organization because sovereignty is not a status, it's actually a practice, which means like you're much more empowered to exercise it because you don't need anyone to grant it to you. And This as a practice is seen as a desire and an ability to collectively shape our own destiny through self-reliance, but also interdependency. Important is that new network sovereignties are not bound to a defined physical territory. What I mean by this is, if I ask you, are you a Crypto Commons member, and this house disappears, would you change your mind? You would still be a Crypto Commons member. So you're not attached to a specific physicality, although it helps. It's much more a kinship of sorts that is tying you all together. Salud. So its existence doesn't depend necessarily on in-person interactions. It does not need to be backed by the monopoly of the use of force like the state needs. And it doesn't seek to gain sovereignty under the law. Governance. Governance is not whatever we want, and this is why new network sovereignties are normative. They have sort of like a moral understanding of what we want to see in the world, and that means it's participatory, it's bottom-up, the rules are established by consent. Basically what we did yesterday, having like a board and like us agreeing to join certain teams, that is bottom-up and participatory. And in link with the conversation we had earlier on neighborhood, what is built on is subsidiarity. And this is a very interesting concept, which means it's not that the center distributes to the lower levels, the localities, it's the localities that intentionally push decision-making up to the level of the network where they think that decisions can be best addressed. Now, development, how do we produce, consume, distribute goods within new network sovereignties? So this is something that I would love to hear your opinion so we can work further on this. But it's fair to say we are influenced by three frameworks. One of them is mutualism. I don't know if you know Sarah Horowitz. She talks a lot about it. Local communities are organized around social purposes through sustainable economic mechanisms with a long-term focus. This is not charity. We're producing. It just means that we're not necessarily driven for profit in the extractivist way that we see it happen in capitalism. Interwoven. These, like Julio just said, these localities are connected through collaborative exchange networks. They're not isolated, but they're inserted into the global without losing autonomy. Sort of Crypto Commons have becoming also part of Cabin. And cosmolocalism, I don't know if you know Michel Bowens, he talks about it a lot, which means, okay, when we produce, it would be smart that we produce locally whatever is material, tangible, you know, food and things of the sort, and the immaterial, we can benefit from producing it at a global scale, like data and software, because of kind of like leveraging how sort of like that type of digital commons can be better produced at a global level. So now membership. What happens with the members that become a part of the new network sovereignties? I think the concept that comes close to it is not the nation, it's not the startup society, it's more the communities of faith. Not sure if you're familiar with this term, but what it means is that entry is voluntary. It is lower than entering into a nation state, obviously, right? Because you can opt in, but I would say what we're sharing here is kinship, is a cosmovision. It's not like Balaji says, okay, we need to come together around one specific moral commandment, but rather a framework through which we see the world. The exit is possible, and this is very important because you can be a part of many new network sovereignties at the same time. It's not like a zero-sum game like you have with passports. Or you would have, I don't know, I'm not sure if Balaji pronounces himself about it, but the bond is built around both in-person and online interactions by that shared kinship or cosmovision, which means that membership doesn't depend on technology, but technology helps us augment that social bond. And this is perhaps the most interesting element, and Primavera will come after us to talk about coordinations, and perhaps it will become more clear, but the thing is that new network sovereignties are polycentric. And polycentricity is a concept developed, if you know the Ostroms, and, well, not developed, but made famous through the writings. And the point is that these sovereignties are different from the nation state. They don't aspire to become nation states because they don't need it. And they're not dependent on them to survive, because for a new network sovereignty to be, there has to be a certain degree of internal self-reliance or closure within the network, which means that the network itself must be sufficiently self-referential. Let's say, if we have the state kind of like trying to shut us down, our governance and resource management should allow us to exist and subsist. And most importantly, we are not independent. That is very Westphalian. It's still present in biology. We're interdependent, both endogenously within the network, as well as across the community at large. And how that happens is like, okay, to begin with, maybe Julia, I think it's a good example. I don't know how you went about with Cabin, but it's like, okay, we start by exchanging knowledge, expertise, best practices for mutual learning and growth. And then we have sufficient trust, and we can perhaps talk about resource sharing and collaboration. So I think the difference, and this is what we hope to achieve by promoting this concept, is that instead of transferring power to the new elite, the tech elite, we're bringing it back to the grassroots. However, I mean, insurgents could say this is very weak shit, right? Like, we actually need to overthrow the state. And post-colonialists can say this is some, white people shit. And like, perhaps there is a point in that to be made. But I think it is worth to say, for some anarcho-socialists, or even myself, I'm a little bit of everything. I think that the framework respects cultural diversity and self-determination at the local level, and encourages global solidarity. But most importantly, I think it allows us to work through the cracks. This is something that I didn't say myself, it's another person in my team. Which is sort of the idea of interstitial revolution, right? You don't need to overthrow the state. The state is dumb enough to create conflict that opens cracks through which you can bring about a revolution and make it sustainable in the long term, and that is what we're trying to achieve. And that's it. Thank you. And I think we should bring in, do we want to take 5 minutes before the next talk? So we do it? We do it? I think the questions, because Primavera, who is our very good Curtis Yarving, she's the influential mindset behind this idea, she will be joining online, and I think she's the best one to answer the questions alongside us. So I would recommend we keep them for the end. Yeah. Yeah, okay, super. Questions. But I think with Primavera for the questions.
It depends. Turn who's next to you and talk about sovereignty. What do you think about it?
Hello. Hey, can you hear me? Hello. Hey. Hey, can you hear me? Yes. Wow, there's a huge lag. Hello. Hey. Hello? Can you hear me? Yes. Hello? Pink? Wow, there's a huge lag. You guys hear me?
She's that one on on the top left. I don't know if can you hear us? Primavera? Hello? Is the camera?
Hello?
She's that one on the top left. Primavera, can you hear us? Can you hear us? Primavera?
I think so.
Hello? We can hear you now.
Okay.
She's that one on the top left. Primavera, can you hear us?
I think there is just like a 20 seconds delay. Okay. Okay. I'm just gonna put the view so I can check my.
Primavera never turns on her camera.
Like a 20 seconds delay.
It's the first time I see Primavera on camera.
I'm just gonna put the view so I can check my.
Primavera never turns on her camera.
I'm trying to validate the time that takes.
It's the first time I see Primavera on camera.
Yeah, put the view so I can check my.
Primavera never turns on her camera.
I'm trying to validate the time that takes.
It's the first time I see Primavera on camera.
Yeah, put the view so I can check my.
Primavera never turns on her camera.
I'm trying to validate the time that takes.
It's the first time I see Primavera on camera.
Okay, I'm gonna start speaking. Unfortunately, I will not be able to respond reactively to anything you say. I'm gonna share my screen. Okay, I'm gonna start speaking. Unfortunately, I will not be able to respond reactively to anything you say. I'm gonna share my screen. Okay, I'm gonna start speaking. Unfortunately, I will not be able to respond reactively to anything you say. I'm gonna share my screen. Okay, so I'm just gonna start speaking. So yeah, I guess you have heard a little bit the introduction to network sovereignties from Sophia and our take and our criticism of the network state. This presentation is gonna be more of a practical preview. So that essentially tries to reflect an alternative vision to the idea of network state that Balaji has introduced. So Balaji came up with this funny recipe of like 7 steps. And we also tried to come up with an alternative recipe just in order to actually stress out the idea that the network state or network sovereignty, as we would rather call it, there are many flavors of it. There is many recipes. And oh, I have this. Sorry. Okay, that's much better. Yeah, so there is a lot of flavors, a lot of recipes, and it is important that we identify the various modalities and especially the recipe that we like the most. So the unofficial cookbook of the network state is an attempt at doing this. And so right now we only have 2 recipes. Ideally, there will be many, many more that emerge over time. But right now we have this very unsapid recipe of Balaji with the network states and what he has presented in his book. And what we're presenting is this slightly more flavorful, we hope, approach to the network state, which we have called coordinations. So yeah, we have like these 7 steps. How do you actually create a coordination? The main basis of this is to distinguish the concept of the network state, which is essentially oriented around the notion of statehood, and therefore is to some extent complementary and competing with existing nation states. Whereas the concept of the coordination is actually more oriented toward the notion of nationhood. And therefore, it is not acting as a contrasting actor to the nation states, but rather as an additional layer of sovereignties, which allows for those overlapping jurisdictions. So the 7 steps of the recipe, which I will further elaborate on, is first of all, joining or building a community of kinship. Secondly, identifying related or resonating communities with that particular community. 3, encouraging those communities to supporting one another. 4, creating a collective identity by naming it into existence. And then the ability to pool resources in common and manage them collectively. To be able, therefore, to organize into a group that is capable of collective action by relying on those resources. And finally, and we consider to be the most interesting and the most novel, perhaps, approach to this, which is increasing the interdependency by interweaving into multiple communities. So first step, perhaps the most challenging one, in fact, is to find a community of kinship, or if you don't find it, maybe you can build it. This means that it's very important, first and foremost, like before even thinking about like going global and interconnecting with anyone, it's important that we are not alone to begin with, and that we identify a particular group that we feel very related to, from a level of not just alignment of interest, like the example that Balaji gives are relatively strange, of like keto. It's not because people are interested in keto that they necessarily build kinship between each other, but rather really these communities where people are spending time together, that there is, of course, shared interests and affinities, but that there is also a desire of exploring life together and trying to become part of an actual community. So this was a presentation for Zuzalu, so the examples are a little bit Zuzalu-centric, but one example is, for instance, Zuzu, which was this little dog at Zuzalu, which found this community and really loved the Zuzalians and decided to join. So step number 2, once we have identified this community of kinship that we feel very happy with, now we can start identifying not necessarily other people, but rather other communities that somehow are resonating with our community. Again, this is because they might share similar values and principles, but also because they might share the same societal vision, and because of those specific attributes, which most of them are ineffable, there is a sense of kinship that emerged between those different communities. Of course, those communities, again, it's either we find them or we build them. So in the case of Zuzalu, the situation, of course, is very specific because this was a pop-up generated community. But out of those community can spin off many other communities, which of course, because they come from the same seed, have some form of kinship by their own definition. But so either it's about like spinning off new communities out of one community that are kind of like siblings, or identifying those siblings communities that already exist in the world. Now, number 3, once we have this network of communities that resonate with one another, then it is important to develop specific relationship amongst themselves, and importantly, trying to find ways to support one another. You want to support them because those communities are actually part of the same larger family. And so I want to support them because I want them to exist, because those communities are part of my own kin, and because they share the same societal vision. So if they succeed, I succeed as well. So the way this step happens is an initial effort at identifying through bilateral or multilateral arrangement how we can actually support one another, because, for instance, one community might have more finances than they need, and they might find another community that perhaps doesn't have enough finances but have a lot of social capital or intellectual capital, or has a lot of stuff, or a lot of time, etc. And so basically the surplus that exists in one particular community can now be shared with another community that has a different type of surplus and that is in need of what I have. Examples, again, we have like the crypto zoos that might have a lot of crypto, that might help the zoo longevity that maybe doesn't have enough crypto but has a lot of patents, whatever. Those are like Zuzalu examples. But the idea is to identify the affordance that each one of those communities have and trying to exchange amongst the network. Now, number 4 is a very important step, because number 4 is actually nothing much happened and yet everything changed. Because number 4 is when we realize that this network of community actually can itself be identified with a new identity, right? And there is this very powerful thing with naming, because by just naming something, you're actually bringing this concept into existence. And so instead of talking about those individual networks or those individual communities that are networked in themselves, we all of a sudden recognize ourselves as a network of community, as a new collective, which has its own shared identity, so that the member of the collective can recognize themselves as part and as belonging to this collective, but also people externally can now refer to this collective as an entity that exists on its own. Example, we have CryptoZoo, Zuzalu, and Zoo Longevity that might all coalesce around this concept of like the big Z. Anyway, step number 5 is, now that we have this collective entity, all of a sudden we are not only limited about the possibility of sharing resources with one another in this multilateral or bilateral arrangement, but rather we can mutualize. We can actually, every single community that has some surplus can assign this surplus to this collective entity, pooling resources in common in order to then manage them collectively. And so this is the first step that actually requires a little bit of collective governance, because up until now it was every single community that was operating as an individual actor, whereas now, because the resources have been mutualized, then there needs to be some degree of governance about how those resources should be used and to how they should be redistributed or assigned. I will pass the example. Now, number 6, now that there is this collective entity which has also resources, then it is possible to engage into collective action on behalf not of every individual communities, but on behalf of this overarching collective identity, in order to then not just redistribute resources internally or endogenously, but rather use them and apply them in order to have an impact into the external world. right? And so we're not just acting as individual actors that are supporting each other, but now we are all acting collectively. And of course, these require a much larger amount of collective governance to be put into practice, because it's not just about distributing and allocating resources, but it's also about action. And then the last one, which is at least for me the coolest one, the most revolutionary one, I will say, which is essentially like when we think about the traditional network states presented by biology and like a lot of these more like libertarian approaches, the idea is always, how do we actually increase autonomy and independence? We don't like to be dependent on the state and etc. So let's create our own stuff and let's isolate ourselves from everything else and work according to our own rules. Here, the idea is pretty much the opposite. The idea is to actually recognize, first and foremost, that we do live in a world that is inherently interdependent. And a lot of the stuff that are fucked up in the world is probably because we are not recognizing that. But also that interdependence is a positive force, because by creating more interdependencies, then we're also expanding the capacity to act, as opposed to when we're trying to isolate and create pure autonomy, in which we can only do what we can do. So the idea with this coordination is really to try to voluntarily increase interdependency with those actors and with those communities that we actually want to become more interdependent with, because we trust them, because we want to root for them. And the way to achieve this is through this thing that we call interweaving, which means like, basically, instead of just being a collection of eggs into one basket, we actually become the basket. We are actually interweaving with one another, so that it becomes very difficult to actually identify where does one community start and the other community ends, because they have been sharing so much of their DNA, of not only of their resources, but really also of what qualify them as their identity. As an example, it will be like, if it's a bunch of companies, it will be companies sharing their stocks, or DAOs sharing their tokens, which means that all of a sudden, the success of one actor is also the success of everyone else that actually holds the equity in those actors. And of course, the failure of one also constitutes the failure of everyone. And so the more interweaving is actually achieved, the more we become this big basket, then the more we can actually ensure that there will be always a desire of ensuring that the whole is actually sustainable. And many of those problems that oftentimes are described into the commons, which is like free riding, the tragedy of the commons, etc., is because there is actually no interweaving, because the free riding is due to the fact that I can benefit by doing something that will provide exclusive benefits for me, irrespectively of the consequence that it has on the commons. But if I am interwoven with every other actor that is part of the same basket, then free riding becomes kind of like a self-defeating approach, because I'm actually harming myself by harming others. Yeah, this is maybe, I don't know if it's super relevant. Yeah. So that's one thing. I think maybe I can stop here, and maybe we can discuss if there is not an intense lag. Just for info, I think you're muted, so I cannot hear what's happening.
We're muted there. It's going to be like a 30-second delay. Yeah. Maybe, what if...
We came up with an alternative recipe just in order to actually stress out the idea that the network states or network sovereignty.
Okay. If I was gonna write the questions in the chat.
Hey, yeah, so Monty here from Refi DAO, and we tried to start a kind of, just a bit of context first, a little bit. Yeah, we started by trying to create essentially a refi coordination of a network of communities gathering around this concept of refi, and now super interested to look at how we can extend that to do like a regen coordination, so partnering with organizations like Regens Unite, Green Pill, Crypto Commons Hub, Traditional Dream Factory, to see how we can create this global regenerative coordination kind of concept. And so yeah, my question is, I guess we can't know the answer to this question yet, but there's the theory of like Dunbar's number, where you can only have a certain number of connections before it becomes impossible to kind of coordinate or align beyond that. And so I wonder if maybe there's actually a sort of scale limit to the idea of a coordination, or could you potentially have a coordination of like the entire aligned all over the world? So I don't know if there's going to be an answer to that, but I was just wondering if there's any kind of idea about the size and scale of where it becomes too difficult to coordinate beyond that. So anyway.
Yeah, I have a question. Okay, sure.
Yeah, okay. Shall I answer?
Yeah, say yes, Julia.
Good answer. Okay, cool. Yes, so we actually just wrote our first scientific paper on new network sovereignty, pretty much about this topic, about like the concept of scaling in those contexts, and in particular the concept of fractal scaling. So the idea is really like the way in which we are thinking about scaling today with like internet platform and so forth is just to create this like humongous hegemonic structure that just becomes bigger than it should. The idea with coordinations is that you can actually scale like globally and worldwide, and you can have like thousands and millions of users. But you scale in a fractal manner, meaning that at the local level, you have local communities, and you join your communities, which probably is going to be like 100, 200 people max, much less usually. But these communities can also create a network of communities, which might be like more or less on the same region, or maybe even like already global. And then this becomes a collective identity, which now becomes its own entity. And then this entity can find other resonating entities. And this can also create a stronger or overarching network or collective. And I'm talking right now in a way that sounds that it's actually some kind of hierarchical tree-like structure, but it's more like a mesh, which is you literally just have communities interconnecting with one another. And sometimes when they reach step number 4, they recognize themselves as an entity and collective. And this entity and collective can interface with any other actors. But of course, many community can be part of many collective, etc. So if you try to visualize it graphically, it will be a very mixed mesh of networks. But in this way, you can actually scale up actually very large, but without just creating this big centralized entity that is aggregating everything, but rather by maintaining the specificity, by maintaining the individual and local relationship that every community have, and really creating different strengths and different gravitational forces around those clusters of community that really resonate and therefore will create this overarching collective identity, and others maybe that are a bit less strong. But so if we think in terms of fractalization, you can always zoom in or zoom out of a community and find sub-communities, right? This is usually the case. I mean, in like local communities, you actually have like a small groups of people that are very, very tied together, and then larger groups, etc. So I think that, of course, this needs to be like theorized more, and this needs to be experimented, but the general intuition and hypothesis is that we probably can scale just as well, if not better, than the current model of scaling, which is basically just aggregating into one center. If we try to embrace this model of kind of like supersidiarity, right? It's like when the actors decide that it makes sense to spin off or to recognize themselves as a new single entity, that they can do so, but the single entity itself then becomes capable of entering into either bilateral, multilateral, or to join a new collective itself.
Yeah, I have a question here. If rules are established by consent while the community allows ongoing new members to opt in, sorry? Yeah. Any ideas on how rules are not primarily established by first comers, nor in a never-ending flux and potentially chaotic? Sorry? Yeah, basically, if you need consent from a grassroots level, but you're also allowing ongoing members to opt in, how do you ensure that the rules are not established by the first comers, but also making sure that the rules are not constantly in flux?
Accurate.
In this, I think before she replies, I think I could take a stab at that. So I think it would be good for us not to assume, but by consent it means that the whole governance system should be designed such as all decisions are based on consent. And that means like there are many tools to come up with creative decision-making mechanisms. So to avoid what you're talking about, which could be a tyranny of the majority of some sorts of the newcomers, you can actually borrow from the fucking nation states. They're designed on constitutionalization. It can be useful to us as well, which means some rules are entrenched, right? We have a collective, and we say we have 5 key rules. Rule number 1 and number 2 are harder to change. We won't be changing it just by consent. We will need to go on a voting system and approve it through a supermajority. So we make sure that we allow new people to come in, but the animating purpose remains the same. And that is just one way to go about it, right? Like we could have, again, like perhaps we decide for this set of rules there is no deliberation. It will be, unilateral decisions, like decided by 1 or 2 benevolent dictators. That's totally fine. It's a community who decides to undertake that governance design mechanism. Or you can choose to undertake a voting instance, for example. I don't know if I'm explaining myself. But all that to say, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. And like actually the nation state has good examples on how to avoid what you're just talking about. We can have check and balances systems, just to name a few. I don't think so. Yeah, and basically like
yeah, I'm actually managing to follow on the on the real-time video now. So essentially, yeah, I think that it's an interesting question. I might give an answer that is super controversial, but I think that there is obviously a thing about the first comer, because the first comer are the people that are somehow staking themselves into this community. So by its own inherent design, the people that choose to then join into this community, of course, will not have the same influence than the first comer. I think that's pretty normal. The idea is not to create some, like in the case of the nation state, it's different, because in the nation state, everyone, it should be a democracy because everyone is actually in the same territory, whether they choose it or not, because they're born there or because they have chosen that. But there is no intentionality of creating a community of people that actually have a particular sense of a particular societal vision and so forth. It's more about finding the compromise between people that have very different opinions. Now, in the case of a coordination, the idea is that you join a coordination because you feel that there is kinship between this coordination. There are people that have been staking themselves into building this community way before you joined. It is very normal that those people have a stronger influence to begin with until you have actually proven your stake, you have staked yourself as well into this community, or you've proved that you are part of it as well. So it does take time, and I think it's normal that there is a particular onboarding system, and the people that are actually contributing in various ways to the community eventually will acquire the same degree of influence. But I don't think it's to be expected that any newcomer should all of a sudden have exactly the same say as the founder of a particular community. And it's of course not to say, as Balaji said, that the founder should have full control, but there needs to be a progressive onboarding, and there needs to be a degree in which how much interwoven you are, right? Like, what's the stake that you're putting into this community? If you're putting a lot of stake, then maybe you should also get a lot of influence. If you're just joining and you can leave at any time, maybe you should have less influence, right? So I think we need to kind of, like, the question is kind of too generic to be answered correctly. I think there is like probably weeks and weeks of workshop to actually come up with the proper, to one of many possible design for this. But my underlying hypothesis is that it should definitely not be a governance structure in which everyone has the same influence. It should be a system that accounts for participation, contribution, staking, and so forth. And you need to prove yourself to the community that you are an integral part of the community in order to actually acquire the same degree of influence, and maybe more influence over time than the one that have been there for a long time.
Sorry, if I can add one last thing. I think there is also a question that if governance design is either too flexible or too rigid, it will end up having to fix itself. If it is too flexible, then perhaps the membership will disintegrate because the bonding material, the kinship, it starts to be to disintegrate, and perhaps you fork, right? You just create a new community. Whereas if it is just too rigid, then the danger is that it's no longer representative of the membership's view. So I do believe, and not trying to like quote some sort of like market forces answering to your question, but I do believe that in the end of the day, it's like through that practice that you find that P value, that key combination of flexibility and rigidity. We've studied it through constitutional theory too. It's a question also in other sort of modes of organization that I think perhaps apply and will apply to the coordinations per se.
We have the last three questions that we are writing here, and then we have to close it, but we have a document created by Tom and shared in the group where you can do questions. We will send it to Primavera and she will answer there, or you can continue speaking with these nice people. And now we go to the last three questions, okay? And then it's lunch.
Yes, and I have two questions, and Gustavo has one question. I will just send them in bulk, but maybe go through them one by one, or do we want to bring all of them to Prima? One by one? Okay, boom. So my first question is, I I think the Dunbar's numbers question can be reframed in how do we deal with increasing costs of coordination once we scale to higher dimensions of coordination. I think that there are probably some mechanisms developed in crypto and beyond that help with that, and some new mechanisms, but the fundamental cost of coordination remains a problem in my perspective. So that was the first question. Second question that I have is where coordinations, or well, this first recipe of coordination sits with the various political theories of the commons. I assume that we think beyond Ostrom's economist take on commons as also a political vision. But then we have Michel Bowen's vision of basically teaming up with a partner state or collaborating with the state in order to transform it more and more into a partner state of the commons. Whereas autonomist Marxists in the, well, early 2000s were spinning up more radical visions of the commons, or the common as a sphere independent or autonomous from nation states, and basically providing a harbor for the exodus of the multitude. Then maybe Gustavo, you want to add your last questions? We have all of them out there.
Yeah, no, I'm just curious about the terminology, because I saw no states at all during the whole presentation of Primavera. So yeah, I'm just trying to understand better why we're using the state terminology, if we are just following marketing Balayan bullshit, or if it's a meme, or that we want to capitalize or whatever. But are these fair to be considered the state?
This is actually a question of naming, and like it's a
Okay,
discussion.
let me start with the last one. Ah, sorry. Tell me when I can speak.
You can go, P. You can answer that one. Okay, or maybe I go on to she. I go. So that's a good question. So basically, this is a good example of, you know, the when you have kinship and then things that you are trying to agree upon on a more like a detailed level. So back to what we were talking with Josh, again, we made the difference of these three models. We have this umbrella term called new network sovereignties. Coordinations is one of them. However, within our team, we are not sure. Some of us, some people think that we can leverage on the Balajian momentum of calling it network state coordinations. Others think let's call them coordinations. Others think let's call them whatever the fuck else. We don't have an agreement, and I think I want this to be an opportunity to think about this, what makes sense the most. Obviously what is important is the concept, right? What we're trying to bring forward. But I think it's a question of whether do we think that adding the word state does us something good, or on the contrary is bad for the vision that we're trying to bring forward. I don't think we can monopolize that answer, and I look forward to hearing you all. But that is what you're seeing that.
Okay, I'm gonna speak, but I have no idea what Sophia said, so I hope I'm not gonna repeat the same thing. But yeah, I just wanna say, like, with regard to the third question, it's a debate we had for a long time. The answer will probably require a little bit of a background on institutional theory, but the fundamental idea is that we have different types of institutions, and so either we consider the state as a fixed type of institution, and in this case, we actually don't really want to call those new network sovereignties or coordination a state, because they're actually not reproducing the same institution of the state. or we actually consider that there can be many flavors of states. And we have seen a particular instantiation until now. I mean, of course, actually multiple flavors of states already exist, but which are kind of like similar in their overarching governmental approach to this. And what we want to also propose is that there can be different types of institutions. The states was created with a physical territory in mind. We can now, because we have digital technologies, blockchain and whatnot, we can now think about creating new institutions for the coordination of nations, which are not anymore just physical nations, but also digital nations. And so in some way, it's also co-opting the terminology of the state in order to demonstrate that there can be many different ways of creating a state. If the state is defined as the one thing that is actually governing a nation, then we want to also propose this alternative conception. Personally, I think like actually focusing on the concept of network sovereignties might be the more easy approach. But we also really want to to reclaim the notion of network state and make sure that it doesn't get only and exclusively associated with what Balaji has said. And maybe with regard to the second question, so a lot of the work that we've done here that we described was done actually with Bowens at Zuzalu. So he spent 1 week or 10 days with us. So we have been discussing a lot, in particular, his vision of cosmolocalism and how this relates or not to the coordination. In my view, it's actually something that is highly complementary. So in some way, we do need cosmolocalism in order to actually support and facilitate the emergence of those coordinations, but also those coordinations might be a very important driver for cosmolocalism. So the two concepts are very intertwined, and we definitely strongly support the idea that a coordination is not just a new network sovereignty for people to just do their things, but it's also potentially can become a new actor in the international relations scope, an actor that can therefore interface with state actors and potentially create partnership with them. Many nation states might need some help. So maybe coordinations can also help them. So the idea is not, again, as opposed to the conception of Balaji that we don't like the state, therefore let's exit. But it's rather, we can see that there are a lot of things that we would like to do that the nation states are not providing precisely as we would like them. And so let's provide the services, but also let's make sure that the services also become accessible to more people. And if partnership can be created, welcome. We discussed it at Zuzalu, for instance, like a lot of the arguments for the network state is about like the ability of creating experiments for longevity in Zuzalu, for instance, or the ability of like sponsoring visas and things like this. So those are all things that don't require exiting into a new territory and declaring sovereignties and exclusive sovereignties on that, but rather those are things that if a network sovereignty reach a point of sufficient legitimacy in the international relations space, then of course partnership can be enacted in the same way as today we have companies that are sponsoring visas. Why could we not have coordinations that are sponsoring visa? Because specific nation states actually recognize that they are legitimate actors and so forth. So there is a lot of possible collaborations that can be done between coordinations and nation states. But in this sense, it is important that we move beyond the concept of a social network or a digital community, because a social network will not create partnership with a state. They are not part of the same institutional fabric. Whereas actually using the terminology of network states or network sovereignty or however they're going to be called is actually enabling also state actors to recognize that this is something that is more than just a digital community. This is actually an institutional framework for coordination of digital nations. And therefore, they might have the capacity to create international relationship with them in a ways that perhaps they wouldn't do with just a social network. And then I'm just going to go with the last question. Felix, yeah, I think for sure there is a lot of coordination costs that emerge. At the same time, it's like which type of challenges do we want to play with? We already know the challenges that emerge with like centralized institutional frameworks that to some extent become victim to their own institutions. Of course, there are many ways in which we can try and avoid that, but also there are many alternative things that have not been experimented with at all. So the idea, of course, is not to say that there is no challenges. There will be a lot of challenges as well. Again, the hypothesis is that the intertwining, the interdependencies is something very interesting because a lot of the coordination costs are actually oftentimes due to a misalignment of values. And so you have people with different interests that want to do stuff. And so how do you create this compromise and this political process of finding the middle ground that no one is happy with? If people become very intertwined and highly interdependent with one another, the hypothesis will be that at least we solve the alignment problem because everyone becomes a little bit more aligned, the more interwoven they are. And that doesn't eliminate completely the coordination problem, but that's a less challenging type of coordination to coordinate aligned people than to coordinate disaligned people. So again, I think we need to experiment with those things in order to really look at the coordination challenge that will emerge. But I think that's a very interesting exploration that has not been explored enough so far.
Okay, thank you, Primavera. Okay, so you can write questions in the document, share it in the group. Now we go lunch. If in the process you want to buy some t-shirts in this room, you can do it. And at 3 o'clock sharp, we all find here, okay? Thank you. See you soon.